There is something she wants you to know before the story begins. She is not asking you to believe her. She is not asking you to change anything about what you think happens when we die, or what the universe is made of, or whether any of this is real. She is asking only that you listen, because what she heard, in the hours her body was dying on a gurney in a Portland hospital, was not a voice or a melody or a single note drifting through the dark. It was the sound of every planet that has ever had life on it, all at once. Alien songs and alien laughter and alien grief pouring through the cosmos at a volume that had no equivalent on Earth. She heard them before she saw them. That is the detail she keeps returning to. In the account she filed with the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation in February of 2025. She could hear the planets before she could see them. And what she felt, hearing those sounds from the dark edge of the universe, was not fear. It was recognition. It was the specific cellular recognition of someone who has just been shown the diagram of a machine they have been living inside of without ever knowing it existed. Her name is Bristol O. She was a declared atheist. Had been for her entire adult life. Not casually, not performatively, but with the quiet, rigid certainty of someone who had thought it through and decided. She describes herself, in her own words, as curmudgeonly, judgmental, and rigid. She is not saying this with self-pity. She is being precise. The person she was before June 14th, 2024 had given her life a certain shape. Hard-edged, self-contained, and disinclined toward wonder. That is not a criticism. That is simply who she was. On the night of June 13th, 2024, she went to bed. Nothing was wrong. Or rather, nothing she could feel was wrong. An ovarian cyst had ruptured at some point during the day, silently, without pain she recognized, and had been bleeding freely into her abdominal cavity for hours while she slept. By the time she woke on the morning of June 14th, she had lost more than 3.5 liters of blood. Her body was already failing. She just didn't know it yet. What followed, over the course of the next 24 hours, was not one near-death experience. It was two. And the second one, the one where she came back to find her own body limp and suspended between two men who were shouting, is, she says, the one that sealed the commitment she had already made in the first. But we will get to that. First, you need to understand who Bristol O was before any of this happened. Because the story of what the universe showed her, the machinery of souls, the order of reincarnation, the fires that warm the cosmos, only makes sense against the backdrop of the person who had spent decades telling herself that none of it existed. She was, by her own description, not the kind of person who received revelations. She was the kind of person who dismissed them. And then one of them found her anyway. Bristol grew up in a house where the body's limits were not theoretical. Her biological father was a violent man, the kind of violence that has a specific clinical name. He strangled her repeatedly as a child until she lost consciousness. She does not dwell on this in her account. She mentions it the way someone mentions a fact of geography. A river that ran through her early years, not the river itself. But the consequence is worth noting. Bristol had crossed the threshold between consciousness and something else many times before June 2024, in small doses, in flashes too brief and too brutal to be vivid. She knew, in some cellular way, that the border existed. She had simply never been permitted to see what was on the other side. By the time she was an adult, she had lived through depression and through a quiet, persistent wait that she would only name after the NDE. When she said, matter-of-factly, that she had never again felt suicidal after her experience. The word "again" is doing work in that sentence. It tells you something about the years before. The rigid, curmudgeonly woman had been carrying something heavy, and she had been carrying it alone, the way people who do not believe in anything larger than themselves often do, with a grim private competence that no one was allowed to touch. On the night of June 13th, 2024, she went to bed at a reasonable hour in Portland, Oregon. The cyst had already ruptured. She did not know. No alarm in her body rang. No pain broke through. The blood was pooling slowly into the cavity of her abdomen with the patience of a leak in a wall. Quiet, invisible, and catastrophic. She slept. When she woke on the morning of June 14th, something was wrong with the mechanics of standing. Her body resisted. She attempted her routine, the particular sequence of small movements that every person has, the ritual of a morning, and her body failed her in ways she could not yet name. She made it to a certain point. Then she didn't. She lost consciousness once, then again. Each time she came back. Each time something was more wrong. The floor of her apartment was very close. Her body had an opinion about this, and its opinion was horizontal. She made it to the hospital. This is the part of the story that is both remarkable and ordinary, the way emergencies often are. She got there, and the people whose job it was to understand what was happening to her began understanding it. More than 3.5 liters of blood had left her bloodstream and accumulated in places blood was not meant to accumulate. An ovarian cyst had ruptured. Emergency surgery was necessary. It needed to happen now. Before the surgery began, she lost consciousness twice more, not as sleep, not as a gentle dimming, but as a sudden total cessation, as if a switch had been thrown. On a gurney, in a corridor, in the building that was working to keep her alive. The second collapse is where the story begins, not the story of what happened to her body. That story has a surgical team and an OR and an outcome. The story that matters begins in the moment her body stopped being able to maintain the fiction of continuity. The fiction that she was here and present and a specific person with a specific name, living in a specific city in a specific year. In the moment that fiction dissolved, something else became available. The darkness of the universe opened, not as a metaphor and not as a dream, and Bristol O was inside it. She describes it as being launched, not falling, not drifting, launched suddenly into the darkness of space. The transition was not gradual. One moment she was on a gurney in a hospital in Portland. The next, there was no gurney, no hospital, no Portland, no weight, no breath, no body. There were nebulae at great distances, their pale structures hanging in the deep like brushstrokes made of light. There was a darkness that was not threatening, a darkness that had the quality of velvet, of depth, of something you could float in indefinitely and not fear. She describes the feeling as immense relief, bordering on a sense of luxury. Those are her words, chosen carefully. Luxury, a relief so complete it had a texture of abundance. She could not remember who she had been. This is the part of the account that she returns to several times, each time with a slightly different weight. The identity she had carried for decades, the atheist, the curmudgeon, the woman in Portland with the rigid certainty about the world, was simply not available. It was as if a drawer had been closed. She was not sad about this. She was not frightened by it. The absence of self felt like the absence of a weight she had not known she was carrying. There was something else present in that darkness, not something she saw, something she felt. A presence that occupied the entire expanse of reality, the way a sound can fill a room you cannot see the walls of. She says it had no recognizable form. It was perceived emotionally rather than visually, the way you can feel, without turning around, that someone has entered the room behind you. And what she felt, perceiving it, was that it was an amalgamation of everything. Not a god in the sense she would have rejected with her old vocabulary. Something more structural than that. Something that had been present at the beginning of things and would be present at the end of them, and had in the intervening time accumulated the understanding of all the things that had happened in between. The being, she uses this word or something like it, and we will use it too, communicated with her. Not in language, not in the way two people exchange words, but in a form of transmission that delivered information directly into comprehension, the way you understand the meaning of a piece of music without being able to translate it into sentences. What it communicated first was this. She was at a threshold. She had reached the point where most people who come this close to dying do not have the option she was being given. Most people, the being told her, are launched here with such force that the choice is not available. They simply arrive, and they stay, and the life behind them closes like water over a stone. Bristol had arrived here differently. Her body was still alive, barely and briefly, but still. There was a decision to be made, The being was not urgent about this. It was, in fact, almost unnervingly calm, gentle and informative, the tone of someone who has explained something many times and understands that the person receiving the explanation needs time. It told her what the options were. It told her what each one meant. And then, before she answered, it showed her something. It showed her the system, not the theology, not the doctrine, not any version of afterlife Bristol had encountered in any of the books or arguments or dismissive conversations of her atheist life. The system, the actual operational structure underlying the universe, how it worked, why it worked, what was happening at every moment in the darkness between the stars and the light inside the living and the long patience of the dead. Spirits exist, the being explained, or transmitted, or made her understand, in a state of stasis when they are not alive. They are real, distinct, recognizable as individuals, but the dominant sensation is one of continuity, of something the being called the Big Us, an energetic entanglement of all the spirits that exist, so intimate and so total that individual boundaries become permeable. You are yourself. You are also everyone. Both of these things are true at the same time, and neither one cancels the other. The order of reincarnation is not random. Each spirit has a turn at being animated, at being alive, at having a body and a name and a place in the world. The order is determined by two things: how long the spirit has been in stasis and the quality of the lives it has already lived. Spirits that have inhabited their lives with effort and meaning, that have struggled and connected and given their existence something to show for itself. Those spirits move toward the front of the queue. Spirits that have practiced destruction or cruelty are not punished. They are placed very far back. Not as judgment, the being was careful to explain. As rest. As the space necessary for a spirit that has clearly found living intolerable to have time enough to understand, on its own terms, why the struggle is worth it. Bristol absorbed all of this without skepticism. There was no room for skepticism there. The information arrived the way hunger arrives, or cold, not as an argument, but as a condition of being. Then the being showed her the planets, not as a list, not as data, as a sensation, points of intense heat scattered across the darkness, each one radiating something that had no earthward, but was the closest thing to warmth that the universe contained. She describes them as fires, not burning, not dangerous. Fires in the way a hearth is a fire, or a lamp in a window is a fire. Sources of heat that other things gather around because the cold of everything else is too complete. Each of those fires was a planet with life on it. She saw many of them, spread across the dark at vast distances from each other, each one distinct in shape and character, each one radiating its particular frequency of warmth, its particular kind of living, its particular version of the story that life tells about itself when it gets to tell it. She understood immediately that what she was seeing was not the earth alone. The fires were everywhere. The universe was not empty. The universe was full of places where something had managed, against the cold and the distance and the improbability of all of it, to be alive. And around those fires, she saw the spirits in stasis, floating at the edges of the warmth, their attention fixed on the lives being lived on those planets with a quality she describes as enchanted. Not longing, exactly. Not sadness. Something more like the focus of an audience watching something that matters. Watching something being made, in real time, out of the raw material of days and choices and mistakes and reconciliations and small kindnesses and large failures, and the specific irreplaceable texture of being a living thing on a particular world, at a particular moment in its history. The barrier between the living and the dead, between those on the surface of the fires and those floating at their edges, was the barrier of space-time. The living could not perceive the spirits. They were divided by a dimension the living did not have access to, but there was one channel of transmission that crossed the barrier. The being told her what it was: music. Sound is what travels between the living and the dead. Songs, rhythms, vibrations. These cross the space-time boundary in a direction information cannot otherwise go. The spirits gather around the fires partly for the warmth and partly for the sound. And the sound, Bristol came to understand, is why music exists in the first place. It is not an accident of evolutionary acoustics. It is the one form of communication the living generate that the dead can hear, across the barrier, in the dark between the stars. She heard the planets before she could see them. This is the sentence she returns to. Because what she heard first, out there in the dark, was not silence. It was a roar of civilizations, a compound of frequencies she had no framework for, arriving at her from every direction, shouts and songs, conversation she could not parse, laughter she could not locate in any human culture, grief that had no recognizable shape but was unmistakably grief. Music built from rhythmic patterns that bore no relation to anything she had heard on Earth. Every planet with a different signature, a different combination of sounds, its own irreducible vocabulary of being alive. And then she heard something familiar. Drums. A specific relationship between timing and rhythm, the particular quality that human drumming has had across every human culture that has ever generated it. Something in the time feel of it, the push and pull of the beat. She recognized the earth before she could see it, by the rhythm of its music alone. In the account she filed with Endorf, she says, "The drums and the timing of the rhythms led me to it." The being explained why this mattered. Planets with life are the places that warm the universe. Without the fires of living, the spirits in stasis would drift in cold for too long and never feel the pull that makes reanimation worth wanting. Living is not just the experience of the spirit who is alive. It is the warmth that sustains every other spirit waiting its turn. The responsibility of living, the being made clear, was larger than Bristol had ever imagined. Every person alive is, in a real sense, a fire that other people, other souls, orbiting in the dark, are drawing heat from. Every story lived is fuel. Every life given its full commitment adds to the warmth that nourishes the whole. She had been burning on a very low flame for a long time. The being came back to the choice. The options were what they had always been: remain and drift into the full bliss of the eternal stasis, and take her place in the long queue to return to life eventually, at an undetermined point in the future, in a body she could not choose. Or return to the body she had left, to the life she could not quite remember being in, to the Portland hospital and the emergency surgery, and the decades she had been told she still had ahead of her. She began to ask questions. She had apparently not lost the curmudgeonly quality entirely, even in the expanse of the cosmos. What happens if I choose to stay? You go to the back of the queue, the being told her. Not the punishment version of the back, simply the structural reality of the queue. You have been alive recently. Other spirits have been waiting longer. You would wait. Can I come back as someone else? No. That is not how it works. When a new consciousness begins in a new person, a spirit is married to that body. As spirits, the being explained, we have only the choice of whether to be married, not of whom we are married to. Bristol's person was her person. There was no negotiating that. Was her person still alive? Yes, barely, briefly, but still alive, being treated in a hospital in Portland, Oregon in the year 2024, on a gurney in a corridor. And there was still a window. The window was closing, but it had not closed. She could not remember, standing there in the dark of the universe, who Bristol O had been. The memories were genuinely unavailable, the specifics of her life, the face in the mirror, the apartment, the city, the particular shape of her particular years. None of it was accessible. What she had instead was an impression, a quality, the felt sense of who that person had been. Rigid, withholding, carrying the weight of depression with the kind of private competence that looked from the outside like strength and was from the inside something closer to stubbornness in the face of a life she had never fully committed to. She felt something unexpected. She felt sorry for her. Not pity exactly. Something more like the compassion you feel for someone you love, who has been doing things the hard way for a very long time without knowing there was another way. She felt the weight of it. The weight of how much life her person had already been given, and how little of it she had let herself receive. How judged the people around her must have felt. How much warmth she had withheld, from herself and from others, with her rigidity and her certainty, and her curmudgeonly refusal to be moved. She felt, she says, deeply about leaving her with so little to show for her time alive. And then she made the decision. Not because the bliss of staying was insufficient. It was, by her own account, extraordinary. The full, unboundaried well-being of the big us. The warmth of the cosmic fires. The relief of not having to carry the weight of being a single, hard-edged self in a world that asked hard things. All of that was real and available, and not nothing. She chose to go back because she owed it to the person she had been. That is the exact logic of it, stated plainly. She owed it to her. She had been given a body and a life and a set of decades, and she had spent them being rigid and guarded and closed to wonder. And now she could see from the outside what that cost. She could see the person she had been asking, silently, for more than she had been given. She could give it now. There was still time. I felt I owed it to her, she would write months later, in Portland, in the account she filed with the Research Foundation. To give living my total commitment. That is the sentence. That is the one. The being heard the decision. They set out together, though together is not quite the right word for what it was to move with an entity that occupied the entire expanse of reality, because it implies a closeness that is also an impossibility. But they moved. They had a direction. The direction was the Earth. Bristol had understood from the cosmic view what the Milky Way looked like from outside. She navigated from there, the galaxy, the spiral arm, the yellow star near the edge, the small rocky planet, third from the sun. The distance was enormous. The passage was not slow. She describes it as moving through distinction after distinction, each one carrying what she calls a crushing pressure. As if the universe was registering her passage by compressing something. Each marker a cost, the cost of specificity, of traveling from the infinite to the particular. The being could manipulate matter. This is the detail that stays. She watched it reach out, or reach toward, or extend something that functioned as intent in the direction of the planet, and spin it. Spin the Earth, the way you would spin a globe on a desk, except that the globe was real and the desk was space, and the spinning was time. The being was looking for a specific moment, the exact configuration of continents and oceans that corresponded to June 14, 2024. Bristol watched the surface of the planet scroll past like pages. She saw continent configurations that had no name for her, shapes that were not the shapes she had learned in school, not the familiar silhouettes of the continents she had memorized from maps. She says she felt what she could only describe as spatial aphasia, a complete inability to read the shapes she was seeing as geography, as if the part of her mind that converts landmass into meaning had simply ceased to function. She could see the shapes. She could not understand them. Mountains rose and dissolved. Oceans expanded and contracted. Ice advanced over entire continents and retreated. Creatures appeared on the surfaces and were replaced by other creatures. Geometric structures, cities, temples, walls, ports, accumulated and collapsed. Ships moved across the waters. And then, the Pacific Ocean in its current configuration. She recognized it. Not from knowledge. Knowledge was still mostly unavailable. She recognized it the way you recognize a face you've been looking for in a crowd, with the specific physical shock of relief that has no cognitive component. It was just there, and it was right. And something in her that was not a thought, but was also not. Not a thought said, "That is the time of my life. That is when I am." The being stopped spinning the Earth. She descended. The planet grew from the size of a basketball to the size of everything. The Pacific shrank from an ocean to a coastline to a particular stretch of the Oregon coast. The landscape of the American West resolving out of the aerial view with a specificity that felt like being welcomed. She moved east, she moved inland, she moved along waterways. The Columbia River, the Willamette River, the Fremont Bridge, the interstate, Portland materializing out of the abstract and becoming, corridor by corridor, the particular city she lived in. The sensation of descent was not gentle. As she narrowed from cosmic to local, something in her, whatever part of a spirit corresponds to the experience of scale, began to compress. She uses the word gigantism, The spirit's sense of itself as something enormous, appropriate to the scale of the universe, was collapsing inward toward the tiny container of a body. The pressure of each new distinction, continent, state, city, street, building, was a physical adjacent sensation of something being forced into something too small for it. She found the body. It was on a gurney. She could see it from above, or from outside, or from the position she occupied that was not quite a position. And the body was there, being moved, the head just beginning to reach the surface of the gurney as the orderlies set it down. She ran toward it. She did not hesitate. She dove in at the exact moment the back of the head made contact with the surface of the gurney, and the world became a trillion fires. Her body's nerve endings, all at once. The warmth of blood, the weight of gravity, the sudden, enormous, staggering cold of a hospital corridor in June, compared to which the darkness of the universe had been warm. The violence of it, the body asserting itself in every register simultaneously, the lungs contracting, the heart demanding its rhythm. She had forgotten, she says, how violent animation was. It was like being born a second time, and the second birth was not gentler than the first. The surgery was scheduled, it was necessary, and it was coming. And the time between her return to the body and the operating room was a corridor of urgency. Tubes, vital signs, the institutional momentum of a hospital moving a patient from one station of care to the next. A doctor asked her whether she could use the bathroom. It was a reasonable question under the circumstances, the kind of practical assessment that emergency care requires. She and her body attempted to comply. She lost consciousness again, and she was back in the dark, not gradually, not as a descent or a dimming or a slow departure from the world. Instantly, the cosmic darkness returned, and with it, the being, which had not gone far, or perhaps had never gone anywhere. Or perhaps distance simply did not apply to it the way it applied to things that had bodies. But the tone was different this time. The being was not gentle and informative. It was grave. "You were not supposed to be back here," it told her. "You are very close to losing your chance." The body was in serious distress. The window that had been barely open before was now nearly shut. What the being was communicating, in the transmission that bypassed language and arrived directly as understanding, was this. The decision she had made was real and it had been heard. But the body had its own clock, and the body's clock was running out. "I am committed," Bristol told it. She did not have to think about it. The decision in the first NDE had not been circumstantial. It had been a commitment, and she was still in it. And the being heard this. The urgency in what followed was not panic, but efficiency. They had done this already. They knew the route, and this time they did not need to search for the Earth or spin through geological time. This time they moved fast, the way you move when you know exactly where you are going, and the only question is whether you will get there in time. She found the body. This time it was not on a gurney being lowered. This time it was limp, suspended between two people who were holding it, shouting, the head hanging back and to the side with the specific terrible looseness of a body that has lost the muscle tone that makes a head part of a person. She could see it from outside herself, the way she had seen it the first time, and she felt, looking at it, something that had not been available to her in the first NDE, because the first time she had not yet made the commitment. This time she felt her heart break for it. Her words, "My heart broke for her when I saw her." She dove back in. The cold of it was sharper this time, a cutting cold, as if the second entry had no warmth of novelty to soften it. Sweat. Her heart, restarting, sounding too loud and too fast and too mechanical, as if she were listening to it from outside. The medical team moving immediately, doing the things that needed to be done. The institutional choreography of emergency stabilization. A catheter was inserted. She notes the strange sensation of something organic being connected to something inorganic, the odd intimacy of it. A full-body scanning machine. A corridor, moving fast. She was taken to the operating room. The surgeon was a woman. Bristol felt relief at this, a specific, uncomplicated relief that she has not fully explained and perhaps does not need to. Before the anesthesia, she asked the surgeon a question. The question was, "Do you have daughters?" The surgeon said yes. Bristol felt something settle in her at this answer, a final piece of something clicking into place, a small but necessary confirmation that she cannot entirely account for. Then the anesthesia came, and the counting down began, and she made it to the number 7, and then there was nothing. She woke the next day with every memory intact. This is not typical, and she knows it. Most people who have been under general anesthesia for emergency abdominal surgery do not wake with the specific, vivid, ordered detail of what happened before they went under. She woke with all of it: the dark, the being, the planets, the fires, the journey, the continental drift, the decision, preserved in full, the way you remember a dream in the first moments of waking, except that the clarity did not fade. She said, aloud, to no one in particular, to the being, to the big us, to whatever was present in the room that she now knew was always present in rooms. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. She has not been suicidal since. She has not languished in depression the way she did before. She moves through the world, she says, with more grace and more mercy than she had before, with the quality of someone who knows, in a way that is not theoretical, that the stranger she is passing on the street is someone she has been in some turn of the long queue and will be again. Déjà vu visits her almost daily. Animals she does not know approach her with a familiarity that surprises the people around her. Strangers stop her on the street sometimes and say they have seen her in dreams. She describes what she is doing now, living the life she came back to, with a phrase that is simple and complete. My life is an advertisement for living. She means this literally. She came back to demonstrate to whatever is watching from the warmth of the cosmic fires, in whatever form it watches in, that a life can be more than it was, that the commitment she finally made is a thing that radiates, that even one person, warming to their own life, adds something to the temperature of the universe. Disclaimer: NDE Cosmic Legacy presents near-death experiences as reported by those who lived them. We make no claims about the spiritual, medical, or metaphysical nature of these events. Each experience belongs to the person who had it. Before we go, here is what we want to leave you with. Bristol O. went into that hospital as a self-described atheist, curmudgeonly, rigid, disinclined toward wonder, carrying a weight she had been carrying alone for a very long time. She came out of it with no religious affiliation, no new doctrine, no conversion in the traditional sense of the word. What she came out of it with was something harder to name and more durable than any of that. A direct encounter with what she calls the system, the machinery of how things actually work. And what the machinery told her, what the being showed her in the architecture of the cosmos, is that your life is not a private matter. Every life is a fire. That is what she saw, out there in the dark, looking at the planets scattered across the universe. That the living are the warmth that sustains the dead. That the stories being told right now, the specific stories of every person alive, on every planet with life on it, in every version of consciousness that has managed to emerge from the cold, are the fuel that makes the waiting bearable for everyone who is not yet alive. Your story matters not because someone is keeping score, and not because you will be rewarded or punished for how you tell it, but because the telling of it warms something you cannot see, and what you cannot see is watching. Bristol chose to come back to tell her story better, to be a better fire, not for abstract reasons, not for doctrine, but because she saw herself from the outside, the rigid, closed, brilliant, suffering woman she had been, and felt the weight of what she had withheld, from herself and from the world. And she decided that there was still time to give it. There was still time to let her life be what it was capable of being. That is the story. That is what she heard when the universe spoke. If this episode reached something in you, if something in Bristol's experience resonated, or challenged you, or opened a question you did not have before, we want to hear what it was. Leave it in the comments below. Tell us which part of her journey stayed with you. Was it the planets and their sounds? The decision to return out of compassion for herself? The moment she found her own body limp in a hospital corridor and her heart broke for it? Whatever it is, write it down. The conversation in the comments section of this channel is one of its most valuable things, and it is built entirely by the people who show up for it. If you are watching this on NDE Cosmic Legacy for the first time, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. We release new episodes weekly, each one a different person, a different experience, a different corner of the territory that medicine calls death, and the people who return from it call something else entirely. Every story in this series is real. Every person in this series chose to share it, and every episode is, in its small way, an attempt to do what Bristol described, to warm something you cannot see, with the particular fire of a story that was too real not to tell. If this episode moved you, please share it. With someone who is grieving, with someone who is afraid, with someone who has stopped believing in much of anything and might be ready to believe in something again. Near-death experiences are not owned by any religion and not denied by any honest science. They happen to atheists and priests and surgeons and children and curmudgeons from Portland who go to sleep one night not knowing that everything is about to change. They belong to everyone. Hit the like button if you're still here. It tells the algorithm that this kind of story is worth finding, and it helps this channel reach the people who need it most. Bristol is still in Portland. She still has the memories, all of them, preserved and ordered, the way she woke with them in the hospital the morning after. She still says thank you. Every day she says, to whatever is present and watching, thank you, thank you, thank you. We will be back next week with another one. Until then, take good care of your fire.